You are listening to the Central Indiana Sports Report, episode 200.4. Hanson Crafton reacts to UFC 313.
You're listening to the Central Indiana Sports Report with your host, Greg Mengelt.
Hanson, what were your takeaways from UFC 313?
So it was actually a pretty good night of fights. Card didn't have many big names on it, but there was a lot of good fights, a lot of big action. Couple of things that really stood out to me. Earlier in the night, there was on the prelims, or I think it was on the undercard of the pay-per-view. Yeah, it was the first fight of the pay-per-view. Mauricio Ruffy had a spectacular knockout of Bobby King Green. Bobby King Green is a veteran. He's been in the UFC for a while. He's fought a lot of good fighters. He's fought Dustin Poirier, Jim Miller, Tony Ferguson. He's fought a lot of good guys. And Ruffy went in there and took him out early in the first round, hit him with a very nice back spinning head kick. So he had a real exciting knockout there. And then later in the card, the co-main event was Justin Gaethje and Rafael Fiziev, and that was a really good fight. Gaethje ended up winning by decision. I think it was a split decision.
No, it was unanimous, all by 1 point.
2 rounds to 1. So that's how I saw it too. 2 rounds to 1. Good fight. Fiziev came out early. Was putting it on Gaethje a little bit in the first round. Like I said, leading up to it, he's a very fast striker. He's got good hands. He's got very good hand speed. So he came out and was putting on pretty early. But Gaethje's one of those guys. He's just his style, and he's so tough and reckless, and he just kind of wears on you. He'll leg kick you. He hits you in the bodies. He puts a lot in his shot, so he does damage. And he was able basically just to kind of chop him down. He dropped Fiziev with an uppercut in the second round. And I think that's when he kind of turned the fight. And then he was able to take the decision from there. And that was a really exciting fight. Like I said, I was more looking forward to that fight going into it, and it lived up to it for me. That was a really good fight. And then the main event was the championship fight at 205 light heavyweight, and wasn't very exciting of a fight. Ankalaev came with.
Hanson, it was a great fight if you like people kicking each other in the legs.
Yes, it was very strategic, I would say.
Yeah, and it worked.
Yeah,
It worked for
he had a really
Ankalaev.
good game plan.
Yeah.
It was nobody's never been able to put Pereira on his back foot like that. He was able to do it for all 5 rounds. I just talking to my buddies during the fight, we couldn't understand why Pereira was being so hesitant. And I guess it was just the pressure of Ankalaev. He had this pressure that he's putting on him. They were trading leg kicks, but Ankalaev stayed in his foot. He made him get on his back foot, and anytime Pereira tried to get anything going, Ankalaev would try to grapple him. He didn't have much success with his actual takedowns, but he was able to kind of stall him a little bit against the cage, hold him there, able to kind of just like wear on him a little bit. So he had a really good game plan. Didn't make much for an exciting fight, but stylistically, he did what he needed to do to get the win, and he left with the belt. So I guess, he could care less if I think it was exciting or not. He walked away with the gold. So
and I thought Ankalaev controlled the boxing, right?
yeah, he like I said, he had a really good strategy. He was going forward with everything. A lot of straight punches. Like I said, he just kept Pereira off rhythm all night, and he never really let him get going with anything. I think Pereira came out and won the first round. He was trying to damage Ankalaev's legs because he has been vulnerable to leg kicks in previous fights. So he came out with that strategy. First round, he landed a lot of good leg kicks, and I kind of thought that's where he was going to go with it. But Ankalaev just he got to a point where he started countering every time Pereira would throw these kicks. So he was getting kicked, but he was landing good shots to the head. And I think it kind of made Pereira think twice about leg kicking for the rest of the fight. And like I said, it was just a good strategy. Pereira didn't really have a response for it, and Ankalaev is the new champion.
And what's next for him?
I think they'll probably do a rematch.
It's probably a good idea. There wasn't really a moment in that fight where it looked like Pereira was ever in control. It didn't look like a lot of the time that Ankalaev was really either, but certainly a lot more than Pereira, who didn't didn't seem to have a lot behind his um, offense.
Yeah, no, he really didn't. Like I said, I don't know if he just looked really hesitant. I don't know if he didn't know how to counter what he was seeing, or if maybe he just got thrown off. He did do well with the wrestling, so maybe he trained a lot on being able to stuff the takedowns,
It's a good
and
point.
maybe
Yeah,
he was, and he could have been really worried about the wrestling. So I know that would make guys hesitant to kind of sit down on their punches and kind of throw
yeah.
more punches.
That could
So
definitely have been in the back of his mind for sure.
I think that's probably what it was. Because like I said, he just looked so hesitant during the fight. Never really got anything going offensively. Didn't really try to put any combinations together. He came out early in the first round. That was probably his best round, and it was more dominant with leg kicks. Yeah, I think they'll do it again. He's a big star. UFC's kind of lacking some star power right now, so I think they will try to have Pereira get his belt back so they could go forward with him with maybe a couple more big fights before he hangs it up. I mean, he's 37. He doesn't have that many more fights left. So I think they'll probably try to do a pretty quick turnaround and do that rematch. But I will say, I think Pereira will have to come with a different strategy because I think what Ankalaev did, he would be able to do again in a second fight.
All right, Hanson. So nothing significance probably in MMA until the middle of April, right? What's anything else we should be looking for coming up?
No, nothing good really. You got a small venue show coming up in a couple weeks, but it's not anything to write home about. You got just Cannoneers fighting somebody. Cannoneers, a guy who's up and down, not really, a big fight. The card's not too loaded, but there is a good pay-per-view coming up. The Miami card,
Yeah,
when it comes around, that's
three
a really big
fourteen.
one. Yes, that's a really nice card right there.
Which fights do you like the most on that one? I looked at it, and to me, it was a bunch of little people.
It is little people, but it's exciting. Volkanovski is gonna. He's the headline. He's going for his 145-pound belt again. He had lost it to the champ Tapora, but Tapora has moved up to 155. He's going to chase the lightweight title now. So Volkanovski has a shot to get his belt back. He's going against Diego Lopez, who's an exciting young fighter. That's going to be a really good fight. I'm interested to see how Volkanovski responds from his last fight. He got knocked out against Tapera. So it'll be interesting to see how he responds. He's taking some time. Lopez, like I said, he's an exciting guy. He's got some finishes, got power with his feet and his hands. He's good on the ground. He's a really good scrambler. So that's going to be a fun fight. And then the rest of the cards just got some interesting fights. Chandler versus Pimlet's a good fight. Rodriguez versus Pitbull. Pitbull was the former Bellator champion coming over.
Right.
His first fight's against a guy who's challenged for the title before, in Yair Rodriguez. That's a good fight. You got Jeff Neal versus Carlos Paredes, which that's a good fight. And then you've got the bad blood with Bryce Mitchell and Gene Silva to start the card. So it's a very good card. You got a lot of good fights on there. So that's a really exciting card coming up.
Boxing, anything to look out for? Want to mention one more time that Keith Thurman is fighting on Wednesday in
Yeah.
Sydney, Australia. Never good for your career when you're fighting on a Wednesday in Australia, but he is fighting on a comeback fight against Brock Jarvis, who I assume is Australian.
Yes.
And they, of course, is a junior middleweight and a former great. But anything else in the boxing world that you're going to keep an eye on? I know a couple of interesting fights coming on, including Mr. Alvarez, Canelo.
Yes, no, that's I mean, I'll watch that, but there's really nothing big coming up until you get to the Canelo, and then you got the Times Square card with all the lightweights.
Yeah, this
So
spring there's going to be some good stuff, but I think you and I may need to take a couple weeks off because there's not a lot until April and into May, and then it becomes really good.
yeah, oh yeah, so yeah, it seems like there's a couple of dead weeks, and then both sports will pick up again. I know the end of the year boxing is going to be big. You got a lot of big fights coming up. A lot of fights they're fixing to announce. Um,
Hmm.
and then the UFC always puts some good cards together towards the end of the year as well.
Yeah, Canelo on the third, and then you got Inoue Cardenas on the fourth. So
Yes.
there is a starting well, there's some good fights in April as well, and like
Yeah.
you said, a really good UFC 314. So you and I will probably take a couple weeks off before we talk again to preview the next big one. But I'm glad you came on and talked about last weekend. Some good fights in UFC 313.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me back.
Thank you so much to Hanson for spending some time talking about the UFC. Always enjoy it, always a good time. And thank you for listening. If you are interested in seeing the Central Indiana Sports Report continue to grow and thrive, please share this podcast with your friends and family.
The Central Indiana Sports Report is brought to you by ITG Media.
And Greg loves Susie.
And Greg loves Susie.